that is not what I understood. So again, sometimes, you know. Baltimore City Council Budget and Appropriations Committee. This is our 6:30 p.m. session with Baltimore City Public School System. This is our last session of the day. We will be back tomorrow morning for the Health Department, all services, from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Joining me tonight, we have Council President Jack Young. To my left, Vice Chair of the Committee, Councilman Leon Pinkett from the 7th District. To his left, Councilman Chris Burnett from the 8th, Councilwoman Mary Pat Clark from the 14th, Councilman Brandon Scott from the 2nd. To my right, Councilman Zeke Cohen from the 1st, Councilman Bill Henry from the 4th, and Vice President of the Council, Councilwoman Sharon Green Middleton from the 6th District. We have, Councilwoman Shannon Sneed from the 13th. I didn't see you. We have Kara Kunst, Legislative Director for Council President Young. We have Karen Stokes and Karan Banks representing Mayor Pugh. What we're going to do for this portion of the hearing is we have a presentation from City Schools. I believe all my colleagues have a copy of that on their desk. It is quite lengthy, 33 pages. Appreciate all the detail, Dr. Santelises. What we're going to ask for is for Dr. Santelises to run us through this briefing. Please try and keep your presentation somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 minutes, if possible. We're also joined now by Councilman Robert Stokes of the 12th District and Michael Huber from the Council President's Office. Dr. Santelises, when you get up there, we're going to let you run through your whole presentation. I ask that folks that are testifying tonight, please use the microphone. If I politely or impolitely interrupt you, it is because I cannot hear you and you're not using the microphone. The reason I ask that is because these hearings are being streamed live on Charm TV and on Channel 25. With that said, Dr. Santelises, if you could take it away. Before you get started, if you would kindly introduce all the members of your staff, name and position that are with you, and then we'll go from there. I don't know if the board wanted to. I think I'm introducing her. Yes, please. Please go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Chairman Costello, Vice Chairman Pink, and other members of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, and to the other members of the City Council. My name is Peter Canham. I'm a member of the Baltimore School of Board Commissioners for the last 5 years. I chair the Teaching and Learning Committee, and I have the privilege of working with 8 other amazing school board members, one of which I'm joined with, Dr. Michelle Bondima. Also here we have CEO Dr. Santelises, as you know, and her strong team of Interim Chief Financial Officer John Walker, Chief of Staff Allison Perkins Cohen, Interim Human Capital Officer DeRay McKesson, and also we have Sean Conley here as well, Keith Scroggins, and other leaders within the team. Before we begin this presentation, we just want to give a wholehearted thank you from the board. A thank you to our mayor, Catherine Pugh, the leadership of Jack Young, the president, and all the members of this council. We faced a really trying time with a structural deficit, and we all stood together to think about what was right for kids. And we just want to say a wholehearted thank you, thank you, thank you from the board and the leadership to say, coming together, we really addressed this in real ways. I just wanted to say from the board level is how serious we take this budget and working very closely with Dr. Santelises. And while we're addressing the structural deficit head on, with our 3-year bridge to when Kerwin comes. I also don't want to say that we're not stopping things. We're really, Dr. Santelises will lay out a vision around how we are looking to advance literacy, wholeness of children, leadership within our system. This is really important. We have to move the needle academically for our students. We're committed to that, and we believe this budget lays a foundation to do that. So we just want to say thank you again for everything that you've done. Your leadership together, I think we can really think about getting the resources we need to provide great education and support for our kids, because what we do know is when we do that, they're super, super successful, and they're incredible. And we can, we're really just excited for the next chapter working alongside you all. And now I'm just really pleased to introduce Dr. Santelises. One note that I would make is I, in my professional career, work across the country in the education space. And we have one of the most phenomenal superintendents right here who is leading a charge in a first year, taking on a really challenging situation, and is going to lay out an incredible academic vision for our students. We are incredibly fortunate to have Dr. Santelises leading the charge, and it's my great pleasure to introduce her.
Thank you.
And Dr. Santelises, if there are any staff that were missed, if you could please introduce them.
Sure, and I thank you, Commissioner Kamen, and I also want to thank Chairman Costello, City Council President Young, and the entire City Council for being here tonight. Other staff that we may have missed is, excuse me, we have Melissa Broom, who is part of our legislative team, Dewana Starrett, who is part of our legislative team. We have Jenny, oh Lord, Woo, thank you, so sorry. When you only call people by their first name, that's what sticks. Jenny, who's my special assistant, by the way. And then we have Keith Scroggins, who's our Chief Operating Officer. We have Marianne Cox, who is our Deputy Chief Financial Officer. We have Sean Conley, who was introduced, but he's our Chief Academic Officer. And we have Jen Dull, who is a key assistant to our Chief Academic Officer. So I will, I would like to use most of our time before you today to actually dig into the budget, giving you the overview, and then clearly the opportunity to ask questions. I would just only follow what Commissioner Kamen said, in that we in city schools truly appreciate the support that we have received from the City Council, the leadership from our mayor, the state delegation, and quite frankly, as you all know, the entire city of Baltimore. The budget that we are presenting today is certainly not the most ideal, but what we are most proud of is that we have prioritized the work that we believe will help increase and will increase not only student achievement, but frankly the vitality of our city through the vitality of our schools. And so without further ado, since I'm sure you will hear from me later on this evening as I answer questions, I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, John Walker, to walk us through the first part of our presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and City Council members. I want to go through a little bit the highlights of our fiscal year 2018 budget. The objectives of our presentation tonight are number one, to give you a budget overview. Then we will talk about what our strategic investments are. We want to give you a little bit of an idea of how we are advancing work in the CEO's focus areas. Tell you how we're trying to maximize our resources to the extent that we can. And finally, give you a little bit of an update on our reduction in force that happened. So, as most of you know, city schools revenue is pretty much enrollment driven, and all the funding formulas are enrollment driven. And city schools over the past several years has seen enrollment drops from year to year, and in fiscal, we have a 954 student drop for our fiscal year 18 funding formula. Where that becomes problematic sometimes is the fact that even though we had 954 less students, they're not all in one place, so the expenditures don't necessarily follow the student. If you lose 3 children in a school, that doesn't mean you can get rid of a teacher. But so it becomes more problematic because it's not a one-to-one deal. This is how we, at a high level, how we closed our fiscal year 18 budget gap. We had district cuts and withdrawal from our fund balance of approximately $31 million. We cut our school budgets by $30 million. We were able to identify when we went through and did some scrubbing of our projections and some of the assumptions that were made when we did our projections and slow down some of the growth of our expenses. We were able to identify about $10 million. And then we got additional resources from the state and the city. And those resources came in the form of both additional revenue and services. We got services of approximately $24 million from the city and state. Student MTA passes, the 21st century buildings, we got to reduce our payment in fiscal year 18 by $4.6 million. We got a little bit of pension relief for the state pension that we pay, and school nurses, which was a big piece, and that was a Baltimore City contribution. On the revenue side, there were some changes made to some of the formulas. Pre-kindergarten students, any of that is being funded at 50% in fiscal year 2018. It will go to 75% in 2019, and then 100% in 2020. So that particular bill passed to give us some additional revenue. There was also another bill passed to kind of ease our declining enrollment, to take the last 3 years and average it out so that it kind of flattens our decline a little bit and doesn't make it quite as difficult. We got some additional revenue there. We got additional contribution from the mayor of $10 million, and we got a little bit of money from a TIF grant. On our revenue side, as I said, most of our money comes from the city and the state, and you'll see that we're getting a $13 million increase in our contribution from Baltimore City in fiscal year 18. But even with the additional revenue that we're getting from the state because of our declining enrollment and the increase in the relative wealth of Baltimore City in comparison to the state as a whole, which is also a piece of the formula, even with the additional dollars that we give, we're still getting $15 million less from the state government in 2018 than we got in 2017. On the next slide, you'll see how our school allocations are broken down. On the left-hand side, we did it by object of expenditure, salaries and benefits, and contractual services, those sorts of things. On the right-hand side, we've broken the school budgets down by state reporting category. We're required by the state of Maryland to report our expenses in certain categories: administration, mid-level administration, which is the administration at the school level, principals, assistant principals, staff, instruction, and down the line. So that's the school piece. Now, when we did our per pupil amounts for fiscal year 18, you see that our proposed budget for fiscal year 18 has a per pupil amount of approximately $5,416 per student, and that's a decrease from fiscal year 17's $5,569 per student. And that has a lot to do with the $30 million cut that was made to the schools. On the charter school side, you'll see that charter schools are funded by a different model. We are required by the state to fund charter schools based on a revenue model. In other words, we take the amount of revenue that we get in total, we're able to subtract out certain needs-based things and district-wide exclusions. Whatever's left, we have to divide it by the number of students that we have, and that's the per pupil amount for charter schools. In this case, you'll see that the charter school amount went up slightly from $91.41 to $92.88. However, we have instituted in fiscal year 2018 a mandatory fee that all charter schools will pay for emergency services, our school police service. If one of our schools dials 911, they get our school police. They don't get, city police. So we figured that was not an administrative expense, and that's something that we could charge as a mandatory fee. So we're doing that at the rate of approximately $125 in fiscal year 18. Just to give a little bit of an idea of how our budget is broken down, 82% of our general fund budget either goes to schools or school-related activities. And when you get through everything else, you'll see that our central administration, what we call our district office, once you take out all the things that are either school-related or our debt service payments or 21st century or those kinds of things, is only 7% of our general fund budget is what we use to fund our district administration. These are some of the district office supports that we make to schools that are included in our central budget, but are actually supports to schools. That's student transportation, non-public placement for students with disabilities, utilities, telephone and internet for our schools, the school police force, and athletics. This is our district office expenditures by state reporting category. As you'll see, and you'll see that there's been a reduction from fiscal year 17. And this is our district office allocations by our offices, our breakdown, our departments at Baltimore City Schools. And you'll see where those dollars went, and you'll see that most offices took a reduction in fiscal 18. Now I'd like to turn it over to our Chief of Staff, Allison Perkins Cohen, and she'll talk a little bit about our strategic investments at City Schools.
Thanks very much. Thanks everybody for being here and giving us an opportunity to come talk to you about our budget. I'm very pleased to be in a position where we can start talking about the strategic investments we're using to move forward and to be a little bit past, not completely past, but a little bit past some of our budget challenges, so we can actually focus on, I think, the job that people want us to be doing, which is focusing on students. So one of the things that with this budget, you know, we had to make difficult choices, so we really wanted to make sure that we were focusing our resources where they were most needed. And so one of those areas is full-day pre-K through the support of all the advocates, through the support, the advocacy of the council and our delegation in the state. And the mayor, we were able to secure support for full-day pre-K for our students that gets up to 100% support in year 3. And that's just a huge benefit for us. Pre-K is something that's been really invaluable to our students, and our students, when they go to our full-day pre-K programs, are coming to kindergarten more ready than their peers in the rest of the state. And that's just a huge accomplishment, and so we're so pleased to have that investment in this year's budget. One thing we're also really trying to focus on is making sure that our students have access to rigorous programs. So we really looked at how do we make sure that across the district, across zip codes, that all of our students have access to the kinds of programming that's going to prepare them for careers, for college, you know, to be successful citizens in Baltimore or wherever they land. So one of those things is increasing their commitment to Project Lead the Way in 10 schools that serves middle schools. Also expanding our programming for gifted and advanced learners. Again, we want to make sure we're creating a pipeline of students who are qualifying for our most competitive schools and ready to perform at the highest levels. So we want to make sure that programming is available across the city. And then also expanding the support for dual enrollment. So we've more than doubled that investment. We want to keep increasing that investment, but that's again an opportunity for our students to be engaged in college level courses while they're in high school. We also, in the earliest stages of the budget, in the first round that we did, when we had to make really severe cuts, we had to make some cuts to some programs that are really important to the district and that we've invested in for a while. So we're pleased that with the additional resources we got from the city and the state, we've been able to reinvest in some of these areas that we initially thought we may not be able to. So one is international baccalaureate programming at City College, Mount Washington, and Thomas Jefferson. Then we really focused on schools who in the first rounds had to do some split level classes, which we didn't want to be the way our students were engaging in those schools, so we were able to provide support to make sure that was not happening. We also are able to support TWIGS, which has been a really important program for School for the Arts. A few years back, you know, we had concerns that BSA was not able to recruit the level of talent it needed from Baltimore City alone, that it was taking a substantial portion of students from the county to meet the high standards that they have for their world-class arts programming. But to address that challenge, the City Schools and School for the Arts created the TWIGS program, which kind of creates students in Baltimore, provides training at the lower grades to prepare them for the School for the Arts, and it has really increased our students' access to that program and really decreased the number of students coming from outside of the city. And then also, New Song is a small school that serves a hard-to-serve population and has really strong outcomes, and so we're continuing to be able to help them support the lease for their private building. We also are continuing support for some of our small schools that will, continue that we think are providing good programming for our students. We also are providing a commitment to summer programming, which particularly is important in this summer, as the summer is longer than it has been in past summers due to the executive order and the start after Labor Day. So we thought that was an important investment. We're very appreciative to the city for their contribution of $4.6 million towards the bond payment, which reduces the amount that we have to pay for this important investment in the city, which is going to result in 2 new buildings this summer and another additional 2 buildings next year in the middle of the year. So this is an exciting time for 21st Century as we're starting to actually see the benefit of all the work we've been doing on that. 21st Century Buildings is, we're also trying to really make sure that we're improving the quality of all of our buildings. So we are, part of that is we have 2 new grants for 2 new net zero schools in Graceland Park and Holabird, where they will have, they will be energy neutral. Then we have, we're going to make progress on our air conditioning. We're doing a $6 million investment as part of our 5-year plan to increase air conditioning across the city, and we're trying to do it as much as we can in units that are more energy efficient and that also provide heat, because one of the real challenges we have in many of our schools is they do not have adequate heating for our students. So we're trying to spend a little bit more but get more energy efficient systems that also will provide heat for those schools where that's constantly a challenge. And then we're also creating a position in our operations office that will expand our capacity in an area we focused in the last few years, which is really focusing on energy efficiency. And the person we have in that role now has drastically reduced our utilities costs by, by really being carefully monitoring what we're doing with our energy efficiency programs. And so we're going to expand that office to increase that benefit. Then one thing we're going to really focus on is the Dr. Santelisa's focus areas. Is there a question?
The number slide you're on.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was 21. Okay, sorry. So we want to really start focusing on Dr. Santelisa's 3 focus areas. So again, using the resources we have as effectively as we can. So the first area is student wholeness. So we're making more investments in restorative practices. So making sure that that's the training is provided at our schools to expand that across across a larger number of schools. We also are going to create a new position in our engagement office to really focus on English language learners, since we have a growing population there. So we want to be able to more effectively engage our English language learner population. And then we're creating an equity position that will be within the CEO's office. We'll report directly to the CEO to help monitor as we implement programming to make sure that we really are providing opportunities across the district in all zip codes that are equitably distributed across the city to all of our students. Then literacy is another focus area, and so we're really investing in our curriculum and professional development. In the next few months, we'll be releasing our blueprint, which will really dive deep into these 3 focus areas. And we're in the literacy area in particular, we're really looking at international standards and how to create professional learning communities in our schools. So we want to make an investment there. In terms of leadership, we have a Wallace grant that we're using to help provide professional development for our principal supervisors. We also are using Title II funds to provide onboarding support to our first-year principals, because being a first-year principal is a really hard job, so we want to make sure that we're providing support for them to be successful. And then our citywide leadership sessions, we're really trying to be much more intentional about the professional development we're providing and the cycles of learning, and so we're investing in that. This last section is about maximizing resources, and so it's about how do we use the resources we have or leverage additional resources to provide opportunities for our students. And I love this picture of these 2 young ladies who are sporting their new glasses that they got through our vision program with Hopkins and with the health department and Warby Parker that provides vision screening and then glasses to any of our students. We also, one part of that maximizing our resources is, again, we're trying to really look at, in terms of creating a sustainable budget, is what are the parts of the budget that we have control over, and one of them that we can influence is enrollment. So we're working looking very carefully about how do we increase enrollment. So we're creating a task force to really look at what strategies could help boost enrollment. And then this summer, we're partnering with the union and with the city to do a door knocking campaign. We just actually trained a number of teachers today that will go door to door in certain neighborhoods we've targeted to try to encourage them to use their neighborhood schools, or to encourage students who are chronically absent, who are not using our schools anymore, to encourage them to come back to our schools, and to particularly focus on pre-K students as well. Also, we want to make sure that we're really improving our customer service. So that's something we hear when we're out in the community a lot about customer service. So we're doing customer service trainings for our staff, as well as changing the way that calls are received in the district and putting the people who receive calls back in the departments where they have the content expertise to answer questions. And then we're also adding staff in our human capital office, which has been very understaffed, to make sure that critical actions that staff need, like certifications or retirements and leaves, can be processed more quickly. And then we're trying to make sure that we utilize any grants that we have as effectively as possible. So one thing we're excited about is using our school improvement grant funds to have a mentor principal at Commodore John Rogers, Mark Martin, who's a very successful principal at Turnaround, work with 3 of our other Turnaround schools, Hartford Heights, James McHenry, and Mary Rodman, to really help focus on how to turn, strategies that will help really improve instruction in those 3 schools. We also are putting more of our district office staff positions from the general fund to specials funds. And then we are working with Baltimore's Promise was generous in giving us a grant to help bring in a consultant to help us look at things like third-party billing and making sure that we're getting the maximum amount of resources out of third-party billing. And now I'm going to turn it over to DeRay McKesson, our Interim Chief Human Capital Officer, to talk about reductions in force. But before I do, I just want to thank DeRay and his team, who have been working around the clock on this reduction in force. We spent the day meeting one-on-one with any individuals impacted by a layoff, but the number that we had to talk to today was much smaller, and in large part that's because of the resources that we were able to leverage from the city and the state, but also a large part of it was because of the work of DeRay's team, who went person by person through every single person who was at risk, looking at their certifications, being very creative about ways we could slot them into other available positions so we could reduce the number of people impacted by layoffs. So I can't say enough how appreciative I am for DeRay and his staff.
So like Allison said, we went through the layoffs today. So there were 115 employees who received layoff notifications at approximately 50 schools today across the district. There are 34 members of the BTU were laid off, 26 members in PSRP, which is the pair union, 11 members in CUB, which was our education building specialists. There are 5 unaffiliated, so people not in unions, and 39 members of Pizzazza, which is like our principals union. All employee groups were impacted this time, so there's 7 employee groups, there's 6 unions and 7 employee groups. All were impacted this time. We wanted to make sure this is a high dignity approach, so every employee.
That was a little bit fast. Can you repeat those numbers again? I think some of the council members were trying to follow you.
So 115 total employees received layoff notices today, 34 members of the BTU, so that is teachers, guidance counselors, librarians primarily, 26 members in PSRP, which is our para union, so there were some staff associates, some team support paraprofessionals who support with like IEP paperwork, 11 in CUB, so they are supervisors, and they were in the education building specialists, so they worked in our facilities team, 5 unaffiliated, so people who were not in a union, and then 39 members of Pizzazza, which is our principals union, so they were APs and then people in the an academic office in the central. 39. So 34 BTU, 26 in Pizzazz and PSRP, 11 in CUB, 5 unaffiliated, and 39 in Pizzazza. This is in the city schools press release that came out today as well. Overall, there were 32 members laid off at the district level and 83 who worked in schools in some capacity. So as you know, this is significantly less than we had anticipated earlier, and that is largely due to the money that we received. And also we worked hard to make sure that with members of the BTU, if they had additional certifications, we were to move them into different positions. So we saved their jobs by maybe putting them in a position that there was their second certification. They might have been teaching English, but they were also certified to teach social studies, and we made sure that we did those matches across the district so we can minimize the number of people that are impacted. Remember that we traditionally lose about 10% of the BTU every year. That's a trend that is common for urban districts. We know that attrition will continue throughout the summer. There's small things like you can't teach summer school with us if you're not our employee. So we know that some people leave at the end of summer school every year. We don't anticipate that we'll get a big spike in attrition over the next couple months. The trends that we've had so far have been consistent with all trends that we've had. We anticipate that we'll hire roughly 200-ish teachers or members of the BTU in the fall, which is on par with how we have normally had hiring trends. So this is overall really good. Like we say on the slide, school police, the FOP, we did not lay off in the FOP, but we did have a hiring freeze in school police. And Local 44 is another union that had a decrease in positions, but there were not layoffs. Overall, we had a reduction of about 233 and a half total positions at the district level. This is a trend that is also consistent over the past 3 years. And like Dr. Santelises has said and Allison has said, is that the budget is heavily dependent on enrollment. So if enrollment stays flat, then these numbers should be strong. If enrollment declines, like we said at the last hearing, we do a true up of the enrollment figures in October. And if enrollment declines, then we do a big staffing re-shifting across the district. So we're hopeful that enrollment stays flat or it goes up so that we won't have to have any more cuts in staff. So we finalized the list. Everybody who was at school today or at work today got an in-person conversation. The people who were not at school and at work, they received an electronic notification about 45 minutes ago. We have supports available for all staff. So there's a counselor on call today. There's a counselor on call tomorrow. All members of our staff have access to counseling until the last day of employment, which for all of the laid off employees is June 30th. For the majority of these employees, they will be able to apply for different jobs that are not similar, but might be able to use their skill set. So we are hopeful that some might retain employment with us, but in a different capacity. We've also provided them with resources to find jobs outside of the district if they choose to do so. And we also have counseling set up so they know the impact on their benefits. So whether it's unemployment, tuition reimbursement, their life insurance, we have a whole set of people supporting them to make sure they have what they need to move forward. I think that concludes our presentation.
Council President, Dr.
Thank you.
Santelises, did you have more presentation?
Okay.
Okay. Council President.
All I want is to ask, what is the status of the negotiation with the union, and when do you expect it to be resolved?
Okay, so where we are currently with the union is we have filed officially jointly for impasse, particularly around the salary portion of the contract. We are anticipating hearing very soon from the PSRP about our joint file for impasse. In terms of estimated time of resolution, City Council President, that will really depend a lot on how the PSRP reads our joint application. They'll bring us together for additional arbitration that they'll provide as outside arbitration. So I'm more than happy to provide the City Council with an update as we proceed, but that's where we are right now.
Okay, just a follow-up question with that before I ask about the transportation money. What happens if the union wins? Does that further put you in a budget deficit?
That's a great question. So what that will require us to do, there will be some additional expense. I mean, it depends on where the PSRP rules and but before we even get to the stage where they would rule one way or another, we have to go through another period of negotiation. If we were to stop now with our last best offer, approximately, yes, there would be additional cost.
That wouldn't bode well for the union because then you have to lay off more people.
That could in fact be the case.
Okay.
But again, you know, we would still have to see what the final decision of the negotiations would be.
I'm hoping that the union will sit down with you all and come up with something that's reasonable to ward off any more layoffs of their teachers. Okay. The $5.4 million that was the state gave to the the schools for transportation of the students. Will that money cover summer school and summer jobs?
That's a great question. We actually met with the MTA today to ensure that a number of the major points that I know the City Council advocated for, that we were advocating for, were included. I'm just going to turn to staff quickly.
I'm glad you gave us credit.
I'm sorry?
I'm glad you gave us credit for advocating for it.
Absolutely, sir. So in terms of, will it include summer school, Chief Scroggins? Yes, so it will include summer school and summer hours, in addition to the extended hours and the extended TAPS, for lack of a better term. So all of that is now included as part of our current contract with the MTA.
Okay, I think it was slide 21, where y'all hired someone to deal with energy.
Yes.
Why didn't you all come to the city? We have Ted Atwood, who is an energy czar, who could have helped you save a lot of money on your energy costs. I mean, that's what he does. Which could have saved you money.
Well, I will say, City Council President, we reaped great reward, financial reward this year from the person currently in that position. And I'd like to, I can invite Chief Scroggins up in more detail, but I will say the amount of money, and actually the person currently in the position who would be supervising the person that, the position that is submitted here, that was approved here by our board, actually we got from the city. We recruited her from the city. Our chief operating officer did. And she's done yeoman's work. Actually, it was featured broadly on the amount of savings that we received this year from her work. And when when the board inquired what she needed to increase additional savings, she basically replied an additional person, and given the incredible amount of savings she's already yielded, we felt as if we had a process in place that was already yielding tangible budget benefits for us. Keith, do you remember the amount that she saved? Do you want to come up and talk a little about it? Do you remember the amount?
But the point I'm trying to make is that we're trying to help you with your budget, and we're hiring someone when the city already have a person that's doing that type of work. And Ted Atwood, he saved the city millions and millions of dollars,
Yes.
And I'm quite sure he would have been happy, him and his staff, to walk through the school system and make recommendations. And they also have grant money, because the schools are really the cities. So he could have helped instead of spending money to hire someone else at a time when we land off teachers. I just don't get that.
Well, we have had discussions with Mr. Atwood. We hired Raj Bajubai, who was a longtime city employee who was working in the energy section, actually mainly by herself, and was providing us with information over the years. In just 3 years, a little more than 3 years, she's been able to save actually $2.9 million by evaluating all of our bills. She looks at every school. We've given her the best software for energy reviews of all bills, and she's been able to actually solve a lot of issues involving water bills, electricity bills, and so we think she is top-notch in terms of the work that she's performing. Now, we've been in discussion with Mr. Atwood. He knows our issues, and he certainly is welcome to come at any time to assist us. But we do believe, and Raj, I know, has been in conversation with Ted. We think Raj is doing a great job, and I think if Ted felt that she was not up to par, he would definitely offer assistance. But I think saving $2.9 million in 3 years is doing a great job, and that's why we wanted to provide one other person to assist her, because she was just basically one person doing that job.
I understand, but when we look at duplication in city government, and the school system is still, even though they're separate, a part of city government, you have your own payroll, your own general service, your own transportation. I mean, we need to be, if we want to fix a structural deficit, we need to be looking at how we can collectively work together by combining some of these duplication of departments. That's just my comment.
No, I do understand, but understand now transportation is totally different from the city's transportation. And many of the things that General Services gets the credit for, a lot of that happened earlier, before Mr. Atwood, in terms of the ESCO programs and things. That was initiated back in the early 2000s.
But the point I'm trying to make, Mr. Scroggins, is that there is duplication, and at one time, all of that was done by the city before the separation. All I'm talking about is, if we want to fix a structural deficit, we need to be looking at those type of things. I mean, we don't have to discuss it any further, but that's just my personal opinion, have always been my personal opinion, even when Dr. Hunter was there and I wasn't even in the council. But as a young community activist, those are the things I looked at.
No, point well taken, City Council President, and I will say that on a number of fronts, particularly given our process this year, we have been looking at duplication, and really what we're committed to doing is a return on investment analysis, so that if there is any duplication in service that does not have a commensurate return on that investment, then it actually does not make sense to duplicate it. On the other hand, I would say that in some cases, the span of responsibility of one office covering an entire city and an organization the size of both the city and the school sometimes makes it difficult for one person or one office to cover that full span. But you know, and we have found in the early years that this has reaped benefits, but your point is well taken, and we'll continue to monitor that return on investment.
Dr. Santelises, in the 115 positions that were cut, do any of them impact music and arts in our schools?
Very minimally. Very minimally. I mean, there may be a handful, but one of the things we were pleased about actually when we received budgets back from schools once they had the approximately $60 million returned, was that we did have some isolated arts positions that were impacted, but overall across the city, we did not see a deep decline in arts positions, and I think that really is a credit to our school leaders who worked as much to preserve those kinds of positions because they know how important it is to our kids. We certainly were not able to expand the way that we would have wanted to and initially planned, but I don't know what the final number was. Was it none? Less than five. So less than 5 arts positions across the city.
Is it possible for us to get a list of, I guess, those 5 schools that are impacted by?
Sure. I mean, I think what we could do is yes. I mean, we could let you know which 5 schools those are, but again, yeah, we could forward you that across all 183 schools, which schools might have been impacted by those 5 positions.
And I just had one other question.
Sure.
And it's related to your focus on staff leadership.
Yes.
How do we incentivize leaders that go into, you know, challenging schools, and maybe I guess the measures don't happen immediately, and so because I see, you know, other places where certain schools get money based upon how the students are achieving, and not all schools are equal. So, you know. How do we incentivize those principals, those leaders who, in many regards, take the risk of going to some of our most challenging schools? Do they get compensated? Do they get rewarded? Are there other incentives that they get into their budget that will help them perform, you know, their tasks to the best of their ability?
No, and it's a great question, Councilman. So I would say that there are 2 driving factors that undergird what you're saying in terms of the incentives for principals. First, we are really working very diligently to change the culture within city schools that actually does not recognize when school leaders take on a more challenging school. And so actually what Chief of Staff Allison Perkins Cohen described as our new school turnaround model where we are taking a transformational principal in Mark Martin at Commodore John Rogers, who is frankly the only school in the state to receive SIG funding and from the federal government and actually turn around the results in a positive way for kids. Now he is leading a group of 3 of his peers who are in some of the lowest performing schools in the city. And part of our work is frankly recognizing that. Compensation could be part of it, and our salary structure, our contract, allows us to do that by naming principals transformational principals or distinguished principals. I think the work we have to do is changing the culture of what it means to be transformational. And transformational does fall in, I would say, fall in the definition you just said. The second piece that we are working on with our Office of Achievement and Accountability is to actually provide a more diverse array of achievement measures that we are using to determine whether a leader is moving student achievement and moving their staff. Because you're absolutely correct. If and I said this in a panel a couple of weeks ago, that we look at, for example, schools like Booker T. Washington Middle. Well, Booker T. Washington Middle has a disproportionate, overwhelming number of young people who arrive 2 to 3 years below grade level in reading. To compare that school to another 6th grade in a school where young people arrive, 85% on or above grade level, will not show the growth that might be made in moving young people, not to ultimately where we want them to be, and that goal doesn't change, but we need to have more ways of communicating the growth that they are making. And so our Office of Achievement and Accountability has done, I think, a really good job at starting to show different ways of measuring student growth. So we in city schools really have dual goals. One is a college and career ready standard for all kids that doesn't change, but along the way, how are we charting the growth, acknowledging, frankly, that some school leaders have a greater challenge in getting all kids.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear that you're taking steps towards that, because that's critical. Because sometimes, the first year or 2 is just changing the culture.
That's right.
And you might not see the gains. And so I would hate to lose principals at a point where we might be able to see some change in some of those schools because they don't feel properly, incentivized or rewarded for the labor that they've put in to change the culture of the school. And then now we're starting over again.
Absolutely.
Starting over again. So thank you.
No.
Councilman Cohen.
First off, thank you, Dr. Santelices, for your leadership in changing the narrative during the budget fight away from fiscal irresponsibility toward inequity, which is exactly where it belongs. And as a former teacher that taught in a school with no heat, air conditioning, or drinkable running water, we should all feel ashamed to have schools that look like jails and to be sending kids to places that are not structurally sound. And I appreciate that the way you led into that whole fight was to show that it was not mismanagement, that you'd been audited, and this is about our collective unwillingness to properly fund Baltimore City schools and a school district that is majority children of color. To me, it reflects deep inequity, and I just want to say once again that I was very disappointed in our governor for calling our school system a disaster, because it is anything but that. That said, I have 3 questions. First off, so today I was over at Wolf Street Academy in Southeast Baltimore and was meeting with the principal, with the community school coordinator, and with a little girl who told me that being at a community school saved her life. Her parents knew no English. When they got to Baltimore, they were able to get English language classes through the community school coordinator. This little girl needed eyeglasses, and she was able to get connected with them. She was enlisted in tutoring and after-school programming. And so this little girl stated to me very clearly that the community school program at Wolf Street Academy has had a profound impact on her life and her well-being. And we see that in the data It went from being the 77th ranked school in the city to the second best. To me, it is very, very, very clear that this model works and Baltimore should continue to invest in it. I'm wondering if you could comment on community schools.
Yes, so what I would say, Councilman Cohen, is I fully agree. There's nothing that you've said that I disagree with, and I think the Board of Commissioners of City Schools has demonstrated through the passage of our district-wide community schools policy, the commitment to community schools. I think where we are now is making sure that community schools are not just community schools in name only, but that we are making sure we're providing the supports and the direction for every school to be the exemplary community school that you mentioned earlier in Wolf Street. And then I will just finally say that a lot of the questions that were raised during our budget challenge really are connected to the additional resources that we know our young people need, and frankly that all young people need. It's just if you happen to find yourself in a place like Baltimore City, it's not a given that you get it. And so what community schools enable us to do, and I think why the board has put so much support around community schools, is to really provide the wraparound services that it's not realistic for us to expect, and you know as a former teacher, teachers in addition to everything else we're asking them to do around the instructional program, to also single-handedly staff food pantries and to single-handedly make sure every young person has a pair of eyeglasses. And so what community schools does is it enables the school to leverage additional outside resources that we know that research will point to actually make a difference in how young people learn. So no, I would just agree and say that the board has been consistent.
And just to be clear, the model does not work unless it's funded, right? I mean, there's no magical make a community school unless you have a community school coordinator to do the work and you have an anchor institution. I mean,
right. I mean, so let's be clear. There are always outlier examples that some people like to pull down and say, well, this school did it without all of that or did it with this. But we do know that at scale, if we're going to actually have critical numbers of our schools in Baltimore City, yes, you need qualified staff to fund it. You need community partners who are willing to put resources of time, money, but also just goods and services on the table.
Great. Second question. Education research is all over the place, but there is one area where there seems to be some pretty strong consensus, and that is around pre-kindergarten and early learning, high-quality early learning, and that's why I'm so glad Baltimore is a leader in investing in pre-K. I am wondering, though, what would it take to get us to universal pre-kindergarten for every kid in our city?
Sure. So this has been a dream of mine for a long time, and what I can get you, Councilman, is the latest numbers. I haven't run the numbers lately, given this past year. I haven't been able to focus on what it would cost to fund universal pre-K, but I will say this, to your point, that Baltimore City, over the last decade, has committed to pre-K. We have seen the results of that investment. Yes, we need to build on that investment so that the head start that young people are coming with is actually maximized at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. But if we were to really continue to place our bets, and it's one of the things that even in the budget challenges we've had are really ongoing questions about making sure that we're maintaining the quality, right? And it's not just about having the classrooms, but to your point, what really helped Baltimore City's public schools turn the corner was not just the expansion of offerings, but the commitment of resources to making sure we had high quality pre-K. So I can certainly get the numbers. I haven't looked in a number of years at what the cost for universal pre-K would be, but I'm more than happy to get that for you.
Yeah, I would love to know
Great.
what it would take. And then my third question relates to transportation. As you know, President Young and the Education Committee were huge advocates for making sure our young people could ride the bus until 8 p.m. So I was very glad to hear that you all had a productive meeting with MTA. That was not the case a little while ago, so I'm really glad we've turned a corner on that. However, I want to ask about some potential efficiencies. I'm going to channel my friend Citizen Trueheart in asking about money that we are spending to transport disabled and homeless children. There is no question, everyone on this committee and in this chamber would agree that we absolutely need to make sure disabled and homeless young people are able to get to school. We know that we had a lawsuit, which states in no uncertain terms. However, we are spending a pretty exorbitant amount of money to provide a taxi ride for each kid. I do wonder, in sort of this drive toward being a leaner, more efficient, more accountable budget, can we find some efficiencies? I mean, it seems like there should be a cheaper way to transport kids, recognizing the unique set of challenges that population faces, but it just seems like we're spending an awful lot of money, and there should be a cheaper way to do it.
So I actually entered, and I'm sure Chief Scroggins is chuckling behind me, because I entered with a similar question, and I think that has been a major driver in our re-examination this year again of bus routes, of working with outside partners with a different lens to really be able to maximize the efficiency of the routes. I know that the team's been working diligently on that. We'll be reviewing the results of that analysis. I will also say that what we have found is when we have operations working, our transportation team working more closely with our special education support team, that we have also found other efficiencies. And they are efficiencies tied to, for example, are we actually evaluating if a young person who had transportation, say in the second grade, still needs that same transportation based on their disability 8 years later. And in some cases, we as the system, and clearly there are cases where that is the case, and this young person still requires that service. But part of what we're finding on our end as the school system is that when we have a tighter collaboration internally between our special educators and our transportation officials, that there are efficiencies that come from, frankly, closer monitoring of IEPs and come from updating who actually still needs door-to-door service as opposed to curb-to-curb service. So in addition to the outside look of efficiencies that you've mentioned, that we're engaged in, we also have just, frankly, internal closer monitoring, and frankly, it's closer monitoring of the needs of the child. It's not to move kids off of the role of transportation, but we're finding there's a cost to not going back and evaluating what the true need of the young person is. So we're also working in that area.
I would just hope that we can take a really hard look at that line item, because to me it really stands out as higher than it should be.
Absolutely, and I will, again, there's no disagreement. I will also, though, mention there are a number of our urban colleagues who face a similar challenge and have found it similarly challenging. So.
Thank you, Councilman. Dr. Santalisa, one of the things we've been talking about recently is one of your focus areas, staff leadership. Can you talk to the council just for a minute or two about why that's so critically important?
So, and actually, thank you for asking, because leadership is what we know unequivocally is, in order to provide a high-quality schooling experience for young people, the number one lever that we have the most control over and that we have found to be, next to the quality of the classroom teacher, the most important is the school leader. Within city schools, where we find ourselves is really needing to rebuild a pipeline of leadership. So it's twofold. One, we need to develop the school leaders we have now, and that is crucial because there's no school that is turned around that is not connected to a quality school leader. And that school leader knows how to develop quality teaching and learning, knows how to support staff. We have heard from teachers, not only in Baltimore City, but in studies of teachers throughout the country, that high-performing teachers most want to work for a high-performing principal, a principal that understands how to develop a culture, understands how to build leaders. And so as a result, one of the areas we've been looking at that with the budget crunch, we won't be able to go as far as fast, is really developing our pipeline. We have a bench of assistant principals, many of whom want to be prepared to be quality school leaders. We have folks who have come up through the ranks that, if given additional opportunities to lead, could be ready. We don't always need to go outside to recruit principals. We actually have talented educators within the city, but that we know if we're not developing them along the way, what will happen is we'll have a great leader in a great school that the community loves, that you all love. They decide there's a time in their life to do something different, and then there's this scramble to find an additional leader. We will be able to determine our health as a school system over the next few years, in part by our ability to turn around and have a bench of people who are ready to step into that position so that we're not experiencing such disequilibrium every time a great leader at a great school decides to do something different.
Got it. And I know, what you've laid out here in the slides is a pretty significant investment. My assumption is that there's always more that can be done if more resources are available. Do we have any data to support not necessarily the outcomes, but just kind of what's a little more detailed data than just the amount of the investments? Like how many principals or executive directors or vice principals or assistant executive directors are going through training, how much training they're going through, what they really need to be going through in an ideal world.
Yes, and we can actually get you that. And I think, to your point, Chair Costello, one of the things that the City Council would see is that while we have clearly prioritized this within our school budget, there are key leadership constituencies like assistant principals, which I will just say forthrightly. We heard overwhelmingly this year from our assistant principals that they need more professional development, they need more opportunities to lead, and unfortunately, we have been very thin on the opportunities we're able to provide our assistant principals. So we can certainly get you that breakdown further, but that's just one example of what the City Council would be able to see with regards to, I should say, with a deeper lens.
Right. I know that some of the principals that recently won some awards from city schools, yes. I saw have left or been reassigned to go to other schools that are probably struggling more so than the current school that they're at. So I just wanted to commend you for making that a priority. I think that's really important. And, it sounds like you're headed in the right direction on that. So thank you. Councilman Stokes?
I have a question in reference to our young people, the ones that either get incarcerated, even in the juvenile justice center, juvenile justice, or corrections, in a long term, meaning they don't come back to the school, and the corrections, I guess they pay, incarcerate somebody is $25,000. Are those same students still on the city payroll at $15,000? Why they still incarcerate on long term? That's considered, I would call it double dipping, but if it's true, could you give us the numbers, not the particular person name, the numbers of how many our young kids, unfortunate, in corrections and been there for a while, and we didn't go back and look at them still enrolled in the school that they were in?
Sure. So what we can do, Councilman Stokes, is make sure that we get you the breakdown of the numbers. I don't have them on top of my head in terms of how many young people we now serve. I would just point out, for those who may not know, I know some of you do, that we actually partner with the correctional system for at least one of our schools, where we actually provide the teachers. Their teachers come for professional development with ours. Their principal is part of our network. It does not reach all of the young people that you're referencing, but I will certainly make sure that the staff, that we forward you the numbers, the current numbers of young people.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Sneed.
Thank you. So I have a question in reference to, I'm just curious to, because all the things that we just recently talked about at Dr. Martin's school in reference to having a great library, having teachers there, having folks in neighborhoods come into the school. It seems like every school that I'm involved in, the principal is taken away. So we now have another school in the 13th district where the principal was involved. You had neighbors who were involved. They came to the school, gave money. You've seen this principal on weekends in the neighborhood, and now he's gone. And so I'm wondering, how is it that we make decisions? Like, is it a sheet of paper that says, hey, yes, he gets 5 points here for coming every day. He gets another 5 points because he took a leadership class. Is it that way? Is that how decisions are made, whether or not to keep a principal or a teacher in a certain school? Because I feel like a lot of what happens in our area, and especially in the 13th district, where there is high trauma rates, where kids constantly see, parents maybe not walking them to school, and folks suffering from some type of addiction, like all that happens in our neighborhood. So to have a principal and teachers to come to school every day, to have that stability in school makes a huge difference in their lives. So I'm wondering, how come always in our neighborhood, it seems like in the Black neighborhood, that the one great male in their lives, the teacher or the principal, it seems like they're always removed?
So there's a couple of things, and it's really a complex answer because each individual case is very different. So I will say in some cases, what we do is we match the tenure of the school leader in that building with what the indicators are. So to Councilman Pinkett's earlier question, we don't, for example, take Park State test scores in a principal's first year, at the end of a principal's first year, and say, okay, because those didn't move and we know you're in a challenging school, you're gone. That's not how we do it. We have an actual rubric that lists what the key indicators are for school leaders. In some cases, frankly, people want a different experience, and I know that sometimes the community experiences, and again, we'd have to talk individual schools in terms of individual cases. But one of the things that I have said at a couple of community meetings, particularly with some of our SIG schools, is one of the larger contexts that our community needs to take into account is that people who are top in their field have other opportunities. And I must have received at least 10 calls at the beginning of this school year from school leaders who said, look, I would love to stay, I want to stay, but I don't know what is here for me in Baltimore City, and that's part of why we need the leadership development. And likewise, on the other side, when school leaders who are high quality who have left feel as if something is going on here for their advancement, they want to return. I will say this, that only in 3 cases this year was there just a decision made to move principals. I have been available at community meetings for the public. I went to those schools myself. I didn't just send staff to be able to answer questions about that. In 2 cases where I, as the head of the district, made the decision, and I do want to be clear, that in the overwhelming majority of cases, the school community weighs in. In the cases where there is not the same level of beforehand input, it is frankly an examination of what the trajectory of the school is and what the path for rapid acceleration is. I too know that a high quality principal needs to be visible, needs to be accessible, needs to be excellent at relationship building. I also know that the narrative around a lot of our young people, so to reference narratives, is that that is somehow enough. And actually, it's not. It is not my opinion that it's enough. It's not what I was hired to do. I was hired to make sure that we have whole young people, which means, yes, they have relationships, but it also means that they should be able to read. And when those young people are far behind, we need leaders in schools that know how to accelerate achievement. And part of my role is making sure that we as a system get better at matching the needs of a school with the talents of a particular leader. There are leaders who are wonderful leaders of taking a school from good to great, but that same leader might not be the leader to come in and do some of the initial climate cleanup that needs to happen in a school that frankly has not been well run, and frankly has had a trajectory of underachievement. I won't stand here and say that I get it right each and every time, but what I will say is that I value and have given space for community input in places where it may not have been perfect. I have welcomed community partnership, and third, I have been incredibly clear with our school leaders that while I don't necessarily expect park data to increase overnight, there needs to be an academic indicator that young people are on a trajectory to learn at a college and career ready level. And there are leaders who are more skilled in how to accelerate achievement rapidly. There are some of our young people who, if we wait for 5 or 6 years for a leader to learn how to rapidly accelerate achievement, they will go from being a non-reading second grader to a non-reading seventh grader, and frankly their life trajectory will change. So I try to be very clear about what our district standard now is. It's only been a year in. Fortunately, some people knew before I arrived back what the standard is. But we are about a culture shift. And in most cases, in just about every case, a principal is given another opportunity, particularly when they have demonstrated some kind of growth. They're given another opportunity to go to another school. So my understanding, and I fully appreciate continual disruption. And one of the things that I said coming in July last year is I don't want a lot of leadership changes because the schools have experienced a change in CEO. They have experienced changes in principal supervisors. We need to stabilize. But likewise, stabilization cannot keep us from shying away from the hard decisions of what it means to accelerate achievement for young people, because we are accountable. We're the only institution, frankly, that's accountable for making sure that kids have the college and career-ready skills that are tangible. And again, I don't always get it right, but I lead by trying to be accessible. And I don't think there's any community that's asked me to meet with them where they've had a challenge that I have not done so. And there are many city council members who can verify that when there's a challenge at a school, either me or a member of my senior team are there so that the community knows that we are committed to making sure, that they have the kind of leader that's responsive to them. So that's what I would say.
So for this particular community, it's Fort Worthington. It's the first 21st century school. And so what it seems to the community is that here's this new school, and as soon as it becomes new, the head person is snatched out for someone else to then take over. So that's just what the perception is, and sometimes perception is reality. But the second thing is Armstead Garden is another school in our community that has the trailers in the back, that's overcrowded, that's to the max, great students in the school as well. And it's like, at what point do we say, we can't cut another thing because they are to the max? Nothing else can fit, not another book bag, not another school locker. It's just to the max, and we realize that and we see that. So at what point do we start making the changes there to those schools that are so overcrowded?
Mm-hmm. Well, and part of the assessment that we've done, one with 21st Century, but also with CIP dollars, is to continue to make that review. And with the limited funds that we have, and I can speak for staff. Staff, I think, does a very diligent job in really queuing up those schools where, as you said, it's reached a point where it's maximized. At some point, though we have to prioritize and we only have limited funds. If I could, I would change tomorrow. Every school that is experiencing any kind of failing building. And I think that the community's mobilization years ago around 21st century schools points to that. I am more than happy to meet with you or any other council person about individual schools in your district and your concerns about those. I think with regards to personnel changes, I would just shy away from individual discussions about personnel moves in a public setting, but I would just say, I would just reference my earlier examples. And I fully understand how it may appear to a community in a number of cases, but I would just say that we have a transparent evaluation rubric. We also and again, it's not up to me to be able to share what the aspirations of a particular school leader are. So again, I don't think it's appropriate for me to talk about personnel shifts of individual schools, but I'm more than happy to discuss it in terms of general trends.
Thank you.
Councilman Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Santelises, and to your team for your leadership, especially during this tough time. I had a couple questions. I'll try and make them quick. So I saw on slide 17, there were targeted funds for international baccalaureate schools. And one of them is in my district, which I'm always excited to see that. But I know in the past, the school leadership and members of the community have expressed some concerns about what they perceive to be inequitable distribution of funding for that program. Could you kind of describe how that allocation is broken up? Is it literally divided by 3 schools, or is it based on need, or can you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure, and I just want to make sure that I clarify, Councilman, specifically International Baccalaureate or any of these special programs?
I was asking specifically about that, but if
okay.
You're
sure.
welcome to
No. So first, just by way of context, one of the things that we are doing, and as the Chief of Staff referenced earlier, part of why we're investing in an equity position is to be able to monitor where our programs are with regards to equity and student need. With regards to International Baccalaureate, well, City College for a long time has had International Baccalaureate. The district made the commitment long before I arrived, and I think it was the right commitment to have a high school that exemplified or that really was working towards the international standard that IB reflects. This support that we give here is really reflective of, and I think it's a credit to City College, it's a reflection of their increased access. So when they are able to get more young people ready to be successful on the International Baccalaureate exams, we did not think it was fair as a district to disincentivize them by taking more money from their budget to pay for student testing when actually they've now been recognized both nationally and internationally for their equity work. So part of that cost that you see here really is an extended cost for testing that, again, is, they're the product of their own success. The cost has gone up because they're getting more kids through the program. With regards to Mount Washington and Thomas Jefferson, these investments are really to support the training and development of staff, to make sure that staff at those schools remain current. I don't think they fund actual FTEs anymore, do they? No, I don't think so. So when the programs got started, I'm probably hearkening back to my first time in Baltimore City. There was some initial support for schools with regards to positions. We've weaned off there, and so what you see reflected in this price is this cost price cost. This cost is the amount for training and development of staff. These are school communities that opted into the extra work that goes into being an IB school. And so we felt as a district, again, as we try to increase access, that it was important for us to support, even if it was not at the full cost. So the schools do assume some cost for being IB schools. This is just the district's way of being able to say, we want you to have high quality programs if we're going to do it well.
Okay.
Okay.
So between those two, from Mount Washington and Thomas Jefferson, again, is like the distribution based on the number of teachers, like just
Right.
what goes into who gets what? Because like I
Right.
said, there's always this perception. I'll be clear. I try not to make it specific to the district, but like there's
I
a
understand.
perception at least that Mount Washington
Yep.
is treated a lot differently than Thomas Jefferson.
Yes. No. So what I would say is, again, part of our equity analysis is asking just that question, right? So we do it by school. We are doing it by school and by zip code to say, is there an overabundance of, for example, advanced academic programming in other zip codes as compared to other parts of the city. And so part of what we've done is we said, well, it's not everybody needs to have international baccalaureate, right? Like the school community actually has to decide. We didn't go over to Mount Washington and say, hey, you want an IB program? That community came together. They were expanding from an elementary to an elementary middle. Mm-hmm. And they thought that the IB programming suited the needs and desires of their community. So at both Thomas Jefferson and Mount Washington, they actually approached the district for that support. But to your point, what we are saying is that it doesn't have to be the same programming, but it does need to be enriched in advanced academics. So you don't, I think there was an earlier slide that the Chief of Staff referenced where you'll see we have been expanding our advanced academics programming throughout the city. We're not where we need to be with that quite yet, but you'll see we've had exponential growth. Dennis Jutras, who has really been leading that effort, has done an excellent job. And our targets really are to be able to continue to span exponentially. So the 9 programs this year for advanced academics are in very different parts of the city, because we don't, to your point, want there to be a cluster of certain kinds of programming only found in certain zip codes. So we're working towards it. Again, and it varies from program to program. You know, Twigs is pretty much a pipeline for Baltimore School for the Arts. And, you know, to the earlier point, we now have the overwhelming majority of Baltimore School for the Arts students come from city schools. And that is because of the investment that we and they and their supporters have made to the Twigs program.
Okay, that's helpful.
Okay.
The other question I had, and I think I lost my page, so I may have to send that one offline. So I saw that there were some schools that were targeted for additional Title I funding. Can you talk a little bit about that? To kind of, I guess they were low-performing schools. I guess so. Talking about the other end of the spectrum, can you talk a little bit about that process, how they were selected, and I guess what the outcomes that you're seeking for that?
Sure. So with regards to Title I funding, for this year, for the first time, we actually targeted schools with the highest concentrations of young people coming from homes living in poverty, or low-income homes. And so what we did was we adjusted the percentage of young people that were required to qualify for Title I money. And part of why we did that was we realized that a school, I shouldn't say we realized, but we realized we needed to shift the allocation of funding, because a school that it has 90% of its young people living in low income, coming from low income families, is clearly serving young people, you know, same kinds of young people that schools that are serving, say, 50% of young people in poverty. But what we have found and what we know, and it's part of what we're advocating for with the Kirwan Commission, is that concentration in poverty matters. And so that shift this year was a real effort to focus in on concentration of poverty, because 90%, having a school with 90% young people living in poverty has a different concentration of challenges. The second place where we did some adjustment was in our SIG schools, and that's just the different model that we talked about earlier. Those schools are identified by the state. So there are some low-performing schools that are identified by the state. The state says, we've identified these, you've got to turn them around, what are you going to do? Right? But that's pretty much identified by them, not by us. And then in the first case, that was a decision we made based on concentration of poverty. So that was more of a district decision. So it's a combination of both of those. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and so I guess, like, what does that translate to? Is that additional staff support? Like, just trying to figure out how, or is it just individual
It's
schools?
a variety of things. And again, because we have school-based budgeting within city schools, those schools determine how they want to use it, clearly with guidance. And you know, the federal authorities and state authorities have guidelines. You can't just buy anything. And you do have to demonstrate that whatever it is those funds are being used for is in direct service to the young people who've been identified.
Okay. And the last question I had was around the transportation issue that Councilman Cohen brought up. While we had a blast at the bake sale, and we're excited to see that our state legislators were able to close that gap for 3 years. Are you able to, I guess, discuss sort of a long-term plan? Because even 3 years is still sort of a short-term fix. And this is something that I know none of us want to revisit moving forward. And it's a huge, as you saw, we had a ton of support from members of the council to get kids back on the bus. And just want to make sure 3 years from now we're not, selling cookies again.
And do you specifically mean 3 years from now with regards to our relationship with the MTA?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in terms of a long-term plan for that, my plan is to assume that it's in place until it's not. I think what we're going to do is continue to monitor the cost each year. So in our meeting today, we will continue to monitor the data of where young people in the city are using their MTA access, to what level, like where are they going. So we're going to continue to monitor that. In terms of, just long term, we're going to have to revisit, I would say, collectively as a city. I think that part of it, sure, is a school system challenge, but as the city council demonstrated when we viewed it as a community challenge, there actually was a far better community response than I would have been able to achieve single-handedly. So what I would say is that I think we need to work and communicate very closely over the next 3 years. I don't think we have, unless my staff now has a big plan great, I thought I was right.
Okay.
So yeah, the answer to that question is I think we need to continue to promote cross-functional solutions, and without a doubt, as Councilman Cohen noted earlier, and I will just verify, it was a very different meeting because of the advocacy that you all spearheaded.
Okay. And sorry, I did have one more question, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry. So there was a lot of discussion around retaining school leadership, teachers, principals. Are there incentives available for teachers, like live near your work, or other things that kind of sweeten the pot? Because it is a challenge working in Baltimore City schools. And we do know that a lot of times they'll just jump over the county line or to private schools or charter, not really charters, but they see other options and take it. Are there things that are available that currently exist, and are there things that if we weren't in this discussion around a budget crisis that you think as sort of a wish list that you would imagine would also help retain some of that talent?
Sure. So one of the reasons why, even in some of our disagreements with the union, we did not move to totally dismantling the contract, because we think that our contract has the potential to actually provide teachers with some of those incentives, right? So when the when the agreement was first placed, as a matter of fact, we've had folks from the state ask us about our contract. Even with all of our, back and forth with our union partners, we still have one of the more innovative contracts, teacher contracts in the country. I think our challenge is in implementation, and our challenge is in providing, to your point, real meaningful opportunities for teachers that are connected to that. We know from the national research on financial teacher incentives that once the incentive moves away, the incentive in and of itself is not strong enough. Teachers overwhelmingly cite working conditions and school culture as what the sticking point is. And what we've seen in some of our partner districts is they'll offer the incentive, teachers will take it for a couple of years, and then they'll back out afterwards if the culture of the school doesn't change. So we're really working on that. And then I'm very excited about some of the work that we're going to be launching this year around kind of teacher leadership within particular challenges of practice in city schools. And it's kind of our way of communicating to teachers that we realize some of our best expertise is at the classroom level. We just need to do a better job at harnessing that. So those are some of the things that we're aspiring to do. If we can kind of right-size our contract, we think there's potential there. And I think really, again, investing in school leaders who know how to develop communities of practice among teachers. Because in those schools, you don't see lots of teacher turnover.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilman Burnett, I know personally that you're a basketball fan, so I won't hold your additional questions against you as we try to. It is.
Oh, okay. I'll give pithy answers so people can get home and see the game. Is that what I need to do? Okay.
I might not be as lenient with our other colleagues. Councilwoman Middleton.
Go Warriors. Good evening. Thank you so much for the hard challenges and work that you do and dedication that you give in your position for the City of Baltimore school system.
Thank you.
My comments, I guess, first are going to be based on career-ready skills for those students that are not ready for a career when they graduate from high school. And I'm going to start by saying, the last couple of days we've been going through most of the agencies, and in some of their discussions, they have mentioned several shortages they have for positions like carpenters, electricians, auto mechanics, CDL drivers, architects. The wage enforcement officers need, all this gears again towards pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship. And I'll say it again, I know for a fact in one of my past careers as director of the state's apprenticeship system that Baltimore City was the first city government to start apprenticeships, government apprenticeships, and basically nationally recognized. And over the years, things started to, they were taken away. Long story short, Department of Public Works just has one apprenticeship left, and that's the water and wastewater system apprenticeship. But there were apprenticeship programs in the Department of Transportation, IT, HR. I mean, HR even has a shortage. And I guess, and then at one point, and then we had a conversation too with the labor commissioner, which that office basically was the head of the apprenticeship system and partner with HR. I know now that that one program, I guess, is in Mowat, and I had a conversation with them as well. Everybody seems to be for the ideas, but no one is taking the initiative to start the talks. So my challenge I want to give to you is, I know you probably are getting ready to start your negotiations with Local 44 and Cub, and Local 44 is the strong apprenticeship partner with most of these agencies, and they also pay for, it's all about communication, working together. They put up money and pay to get these apprenticeships started. We just gave wonderful kudos to we had the fire department, which it's interesting that nobody mentioned that. They have 17 people, students, and I think a large number of females. And they seem to have made that connect. So if they can make that connect, you know, I guess the charge for you is to try to get somebody to make that connect, to get these, you know, it's all, again, it's our responsibility to try to help these students that are not college ready or don't want to go to college and not being left out there after graduation to go into, you know, they want to make money. So they are left to go to the streets. So we need to start connecting them early. And everyone agrees, but no one seems to be wanting to make that start. We have the wage office under Delegate Jill Carter. The prevailing wage office does not have any wage officers to, you know, be the investigators for. What a wonderful apprenticeship to start. Cub, you know, the clerical staff, and so, I mean, these things are all there, so have in your negotiations, bring up the subject, and they are the experts because they had those programs. The job specs and the proposals and everything are sitting right there in the state government's files of, you know, the labor commissioner's office for the state. I know because I was in charge of those files. They have people that they get paid to work with others to help create the programs. It's just about bringing them together. So I just kind of see that as a wonderful investment for the city, and it's a wonderful wraparound service, and it just takes a strong leader to at least start that up. And I say again, if the fire department did that connection, I think it would be easy for other ones as well, and I'm again willing to help make connections, and I'm sure other council members here as well, as we have mentioned that to other agencies. So your comments on that?
Sure. No, well, and I would say thank you for highlighting the need to continue to provide just diverse and very real, as you noted, job-related, job transferable skills. One of the things that my team just reminded me of is that actually the State Board of Education now is charged with, by December of this year, actually coming up with goals, targets, and a plan to do exactly what you're talking about. So clearly they heard what you were thinking and got on it. And I think that will help because, again, the addition of state support, hopefully, I'm not looking for tons of funding, but even any support in doing that, and even if it's the state leveraging some of that on our behalf, it will definitely be welcomed. The other piece I would add is that you're absolutely right, and I'm so glad, Councilwoman, that you referenced our partnership with the fire department. I will just say that every time I see our chief of fire, he is beaming, and one of the only things he wants to talk to me about is about this program and about the amazing young people that are part of it. They partnered with our CTE office together, and I think your point is well taken, that if together we were able to do that with the fire department, we should explore that opportunity. I will also say that in recent months, we have really tried to reinvigorate our partnership with the Mayor's Office of Employment and Jobs, and really to begin to say, okay, let's start and take a deep look at what our partnership could be that we haven't maximized as of yet. And our young people over and over are telling us that the connection to actual jobs and careers makes a significant difference about their engagement at school. And one of the things we were talking about just today in a meeting is the large numbers of young people that we're seeing that are actually leveraging their CTE course of study for college study. And that larger, in so many ways, the paths are crossing over, right? Young people can earn an income, but then also feel like they now have the support to be able to engage in higher ed, or don't feel like that is completely shut off for them, or that They know, for example, that they can stabilize their lives through an income. And I had one community member at a meeting who was clearly much older and more advanced in her career, and she said, "You are describing me. That was me. When I graduated, I got a job, I was able to stabilize my family, bring in income, and then I went back to school and was able to advance in my career." And so part of what we're working to do and what the young people are seeing themselves is really the cross-pollination of career and further study, that it's no longer just kind of one track, but that we need to give our young people multiple entry points. And they are saying exactly what you were saying, Councilman Middleton, that if you can get us to employment, if you can get us to a wage, that we don't have to be thinking constantly about how we're going to eat, how our family's going to pay the bills, whether we're going to have a place to live. That actually gives us the hope to be able to re-engage and see a future. So all I would say is, great, we'll probably take you up on your offer for assistance, and I just want to thank you for highlighting that, because it is an important issue.
And we can't leave out Baltimore City Community College also connects with this, system as well. And I think Councilwoman Sneed and I had a conversation when one of the agencies mentioned that they had a shortage in hiring architects, and one of the reasons was because, you start off with a low pay in government, but here we have a Morgan State University that has a good architectural department. There needs to be a connect there to maybe, when they get right out of college and at least starting as a architect for government, there's jobs right there, but it's not, it's unknown.
That's right.
So anyone that has a connect to Morgan, give that shout out to that department as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Scott, I'm counting on you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I have my laptop, so I have access to the game if need be. Dr. Santelises, thank you and your team for your service. I want to talk about a few things, but I'm first going to start with a question, which is a request. I don't know what number we're on the request, but if you could, to the committee, provide the cuts. I know we talked about them by union and by, their representation. If you could provide a list of the cuts by different school and position to the chair of the committee, that would be greatly appreciated.
Okay.
I want to talk about a few things, but first, Dr. Santelises, that college access is something that's very important to me. It's something that you and I talk about frequently, and I know that you share this sentiment, but this is really also for the benefit of my colleagues. I think that I would ask that as we start to negotiate, again, when do you negotiate with principals, the principals union again?
Oh, we're in the midst now.
Oh, great. Perfect timing. So I think that if we can, one of the big things for me, as you know, has been that our principals are not necessarily held accountable for college access and attendance. If there will be some way that we can put that inside their contracts, and I think that they would, as a result in their work life, be a lot more likely to work with organizations like College Bounds and our counselors to have those inside of their school budgets that they determine because of fair student funding, so that our students can benefit. We know that people do not, it's not an agency, but I'm often heard saying the agencies are only held accountable for what's on the paper, what they have to be held accountable for legally. And if principals are not held accountable for kids attending college or taking the SAT, but they are held accountable for truancy and attendance, then if you're a principal, you might be more apt to hire someone that did this with truancy than to hire College Bound or some other organization that deals with kids attending college. But also, I would like to say that I think it's time for us to have a conversation that includes the city in that, and where we can help to bridge that gap as well. So it's not just on the principals and the schools, because this is a benefit. There's no secret. I'm not sitting in this seat asking you this question, if it were not for two things, right? Me going to Mervo and being a track athlete, and by a byproduct of that, being forced into College Bound. This is the only reason why I'm here, and I know that Case is the true for so many of our young professionals that are now teachers in the school system or principals in the school system, because our kids can achieve anything, but we have to show them those opportunities. So I would just hope that we can work together to try to make that happen for every high school. I think that every high school should have a focus around college access and college attendance.
Well, and all I could say is I agree.
Yes, ma'am.
And the other piece, just being forthright, that one of the other pieces we're working on, to your point about accountability, is that it actually, while clearly having it in the contract would be another added bonus. I will just say that in the supervision of principals, it still should be a factor, right? So even if we don't get it in the contract, it still should be, to your earlier point, an accountability question that our principal supervisors are asking. And you're right, if somebody doesn't call me on something, if I know that that's not the data point someone's going to ask me about, then that's the data point I'm going to let slide. So I think your point on that is really well taken.
And my next question is actually very timely as I sit here making the final edits to my commencement speech at Excel Academy tomorrow. A school just lost 5 students at the end of guns this year. 6. Oh yeah, 6 now. You're right. It changed that. 6 students to the ends of guns this year. I have said before, and I'm going to be saying again on Monday in a more official capacity, that it's time for the city to develop a comprehensive strategy around gun violence reduction. We've seen this happen in places like New Orleans with NOLA for Life and other organizations, and I think that the school system plays a great part in that. Because for me, as you know, if you look at our young people who end up being the perpetrators or the victim of violence, they're the ones who you spoke about earlier, who couldn't read in 3rd grade, who couldn't read in 7th grade. And I think that it's high time that we understand that and that we work together across all agencies. Actually, one of the big things that I'm trying to push for the police and administration and the health department, and hopefully you guys, you'll get an invitation to the hearing, to do is really, we can start hyper-focus on the children who are the children of the victims of the perpetrators of violence, right? Yeah. They're a lot more likely to go out and do the same thing themselves, and also those who are the children of the perpetrators of violence. These are the kind of things that we have to look at a comprehensive strategy, because even if the city of Baltimore invested in the total family and total community structure of the most 200 at risk right now, 10 years from now, we're going to have a lot less violence in the city of Baltimore. We know that's going to happen because we can see decade after decade or year after year, families who start with 8 or 9 or 10 brothers who are now at 4 because they all have decided to fall place into the disease that's deteriorating their family. So I hope that when that invitation is extended, that you guys are willing to play part, and I know that you will be.
No, we absolutely will be, and I would just say to you, we welcome that kind of targeted support, because we have seen the same thing even at the school level. Yep. When we can target the supports for the young people that we know are either the perpetrators of violence, the victims of violence, and while yes, we need a whole school approach as well, but we would be heartily welcome a more targeted approach. So.
And the last thing I would just like to say, that I think that what the folks at the athletics department do with the limited resources they have is extraordinary, and I think we have to find ways to give them more resources, because we know that athletics and after-school activities like athletics also help to save lives, and that we have to put our young people in opportunities and chances that they can have the same things that the surrounding jurisdictions have.
No, and I am actually proud to say that this is the first year where we have fully funded from the beginning. It was under the leadership of the Chief of Staff, working with Tiffany, who is absolutely a dream. I couldn't ask for a better head of athletics. And year after year, what had been happening is that the athletics budget would be cut, and then we would have to scramble to find money for it. She did amazing, miraculous work. And so this year, like I said, based on the work that she did with the Chief of Staff and with finance, we just said, you know what, let's cut the games, let's fully fund them now. and because we know that this is important. So we have really tried to put our money where our mouth is in that and not leave them hanging in this limbo where the second half of the year they don't know whether they're going to be able to afford coaches. So I agree with you, and again, if there's joint ideas about how to expand that funding, we should talk about it.
Yeah, she's awesome. She's the best poly coach I've ever seen in my life, and that's kind of hard for me to say.
Councilwoman Clark.
One of our, by the way, thank you very much, and thanks for our new principal.
Oh.
She seems great. I'm praying.
Yeah, I think you're going to be very, very happy.
Thank you very much. That was just in the nick of time. One of our education committee hearings was at John Rura, and the young people who came from Patterson Digital and Polly, where? Polly. No, Patterson came to speak. And they were representing, and one of the things that they said was that, and when you talked about equity, when we were talking about the IB program and trying to make sure it's the same, it's got everything it needs wherever it is and it should be, and about twigs so we can get our kids into that Baltimore School for the Arts, along those same lines. Basically, what the young people from the high schools in the area were saying was that there is not an equitable representation of ESOL students in the schools that require admission standards.
That's right.
And I've spent some time since then talking with people at North Avenue, trying to educate myself, talking to my friend Linda Eberhardt, talking to the principals and experts at John Rura, the principal and expert there. And there are some ways to help with that, but then what you think about is, well, I've got, we all have kids who pray their way into all these schools and hope that they can get the grades, the score they need to get in. So what do you do about that? So, because it's a language problem, not so much as an accomplishment problem. And so what's the solution? So one of the solutions, and so the people at Rura said, what our kids really want to do is get into Mervo. Now, I have permission to talk about this from my colleague. We haven't spoken about it for a few weeks, but I know I have his permission. And so I was thinking, sometimes you can take a cohort of kids, like into a school like that, and you can say, look, we got to jumpstart something here, some equity going on, because they'll then connect to other kids. It all then begins to happen after that. And there's enough of them that they don't feel like outsiders, but they mainstream in. So since a lot of the kids coming out of Rura and that area really want to go to Mervo, who wouldn't? I guess I'm saying, I haven't spoken to Mr. Rivers yet, but I'm going to. And see if there's not a way that we could jumpstart there for those kids so they can, it's almost like planting a seed. And it really is not defying the score thing. It's and I think there are some precedents for this, doing it that way at Mervo. I just wanted to mention that I'm going to try to do that.
Well, I think that's wonderful. And I also think that you are just reflecting some of the best practices in research that we know. And one example of a school who similarly tried to make sure there was cohorts, particularly because they wanted to increase their ELL representation, was, again, and I'm only using it because I just talked to Chris Ford, was Baltimore School for the Arts. They looked across the city. Their Latino and ELL representation at Baltimore School for the Arts was incredibly low. And one of the things they've done, what they realized is that certain groups of students were not taking advantage of the TWIGS program, which we know is a pipeline. So what they did was actually really try to tackle the transportation issue for those kids, getting them to come together, and they're really focusing this year and in the upcoming years on doing exactly that, bringing cohorts of young people together so that, to your point, they don't feel isolated. So we would welcome just hearing more about, and any energy and on the ground
There's a lot of
elbow grease
energy
you
there,
want to
and of
lend,
course I owe it all
we'll
to-
receive.
To the chair of our committee, who's done such a great job of taking us all over the world, Councilman Cohen. And so I got my passport stamped and I'm ready to roll. I was so impressed, and I kept going back to try to figure out what I was to learn what it was about. So, yeah, I'm thinking next year, work up to the spring of 2018 to get the kids getting ready to go. Or, maybe we could drop them in earlier than that. But I think it would help to just jumpstart the equity that is potential there and it needs not to wait.
No, and we certainly should have further conversation
Okay,
about it.
I just wanted you to know and to know what I'm going to go try to talk Mr. Rivers into.
Okay.
He doesn't know.
Well, I'm glad you let me know first. You gave me the heads up.
Yeah, because he'll probably call you up and say, this is like, I don't know what to do now, but.
But I think that there's a way that we can kind of work through whatever the implementation details might need to be to really get at the spirit and the heart of what you're saying.
Yes.
So, yeah, we definitely
Thank you very much. I had other things, but I thought if I just talked about one thing, it would stick in everybody's mind.
Okay.
Thank you
That's
very
great.
much. It's
Thank
my
you.
priority right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank you, Councilwoman. And Conductor Cohen with the last question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councilwoman, for following up with the young
Thanks
people.
for the introduction.
Of course. I'm going to follow on that line of questioning in speaking about the very specific challenges that our immigrant children have faced this year. Particularly given the new administration in DC, the increased enforcement of ICE, the really unfortunate situation in which a parent of a city school child was detained in close proximity to his kid's school. That community has felt very much under siege, and we heard that at that hearing that Councilwoman Clark referenced, and I hear it quite a bit among young people in my district. And so two things there. One, the other piece from that hearing was making sure that we're developing a curriculum with the young people that is culturally responsive in schools with high percentages of immigrant youth. That's one piece. And then the other piece is that, I argue sometimes with my constituents that having such a diverse population is actually a real blessing for Baltimore and for Baltimore City schools, and particularly because it could enable us to sort of lean into bilingual education, which in this 21st century United States is a really good thing to have. I really wish I remembered the Spanish that I learned in high school and college. It would serve me very well in the position I'm in right now, and I know there are many families throughout our city that would love to have their children be bilingual. I'm wondering if there is a push we could make from city schools around bilingual education and promoting the value of cultural and language diversity within our schools and explicitly marketing that as something that's really good. Because you spoke before about narratives That narrative hasn't gotten out enough, but I think it's actually a true blessing for children of different races, religions, ethnicities, cultures, and languages to be learning together.
So again, what I can say, which is nice to be able to say, is I don't disagree with you. I do agree, and we have already begun really revamping, I shouldn't say revamping, but really expanding. We have a high quality team that really works with our ELL populations. We have school leaders in many of our schools with high concentrations of ELL students, and in particular schools, Latino students as well. And I think that we need to talk about both, right? Because oftentimes we use the terms synonymously and they're not. A family that has just come from Syria is a recent immigrant, but they're not Latino. And we also know from the research that first, second, third generation Latino students have very different experiences. So I think part of that culture shift is moving away from kind of broad characterizations and actually beginning, as you say, to promote diversity overall as a cultural norm and a cultural value. It has been indeed very challenging this year, as my school district colleagues throughout the nation have found this year. One of the things we actually just had a conversation about this afternoon is, while we definitely have to continue to meet the needs of schools with high concentrations of ELL students, we also have schools that are rapidly shifting population. And what we are finding is that a school on 1 year that might have 10% ELL students finds itself with 40 to 50% ELL students. And we need to, and that was part of the discussion today, really focus on the preparation of that staff to be able to handle that kind of shift in school population. And so our ELL department, our folks are working on that. To the point about bilingual education, I think one of the more promising examples this year has been within Baltimore International Academy. And Baltimore International Academy is a charter school that has really delved into this idea of what does late language immersion look like, and how do we enable more young people to be successful in becoming proficient in more than one language, not just by starting in kindergarten or first grade, but young people who start in middle school. And is that an option, as we also seek as a district to provide better and higher quality middle grades options for families? And I think, to your point, what I've seen in previous districts where I've worked, is that oftentimes mastering a second language, and BIA will tell you this is the case as well, is one of the easiest way to attract a diversity of families, both racially, socioeconomically, and really create a diverse learning environment. I think what we have been talking with them about is what are the ways that we can build on their success in terms of really spreading it as a value, but also giving people concrete ways of saying, no, I want my child to be part of that experience. So we are looking into that. And again, there are various ways, whether it is bilingual, whether it is two-way immersion, whether it is full immersion. I mean, there's lots of different iterations of it, but I think, to the spirit of your question, learning another language and becoming proficient in another language is a way of diversifying a community in a very positive, constructive way.
So thank you, Dr. Santelises, and to your team, Mr. Klein, Mr. Banks. This hearing is now in recess until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., where we'll receive presentations from the Health Department.
Great.
And I would advise you not to get in Councilman Scott's way as he exits the chamber.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Doctor. Thanks.